What's up, you guys? Void here, coming back at y'all with another 10 underrated commander cards. Now, as of the last video, I've started to go towards more recent cards. The last 3 sets specifically, so Hour of Devastation, Ixalan, and Rivals of Ixalan is the newest set, so I have a lot of cards to go over now, especially with Rivals, so that should make the video a little bit more interesting. Now, it is also going to be the usual 10 underrated commander cards. It's not ranked in any order, just 10 cards that I think don't see enough play, or maybe not in consideration for a lot of people's decks, easily overlooked, something like that. First one we have here is from Rivals of Ixalan, Silent Gravestone. Now, it's easy to mistake this card for Relic of Progenitus and calling it a worse Relic of Progenitus. However, it puts in way more work than that, so don't get hung up on the 4 mana activated ability. It is a bit more expensive, obviously, but what it does before that, making cards basically untouchable in the graveyard from spells or abilities, is fantastic. And even if your opponent does have removal, they need something like a Croson Grip that you can't respond to, because you can just self-destruct and blow up everything. Basically, exile all cards in all graveyards. That way, if they want to get the card back, thinking that they can just remove it, you can just wipe away all the graveyards. It's a really cool card. It's sort of like a combination of Grafdigger's Cage and Relic of Progenitus. They kind of work in a similar way, but this one is obviously going to be a little bit better, I think, for Commander overall. I mean, you see Grafdigger's Cage in some stacks builds, and you occasionally see Relic of Progenitus, but this card just offers you a ton of graveyard hate. Think about the Mariner Clan Neltoth decks that need to get creatures from the graveyard. They can't do it. Even if they try to remove it, you can then exile all graveyards. So it works out fantastically. I love the card already, and I think it's going to be an awesome card for Commander. The next one is Radiant Destiny. This is one of the Ascend cards, which is, again, pretty much a joke in Commander. You should be able to get it, especially in the decks such as vampires, even cats should be able to get the Ascend, and they get the City's Blessing, so that is pretty easy. Once you do, it just gives an Anthem to all your creatures, and you also gain Vigilance with the City's Blessing, so all of your creatures of that chosen type. So if you're playing vampires, which is obviously, I would consider the prime deck for this type of card, because it's a ton of tokens. The deck already is in love with anthems. Why not give those creature tokens vigilance as well? Makes perfect sense. You can even throw this into dragons, 5-color dragons for that synergy. But there are a ton of decks that I could definitely see this card in. Easy to overlook, because I know people are kind of getting a little sick and tired of tribal synergies, but still, anthems, they just offer that extra bit of power to your team. It's easy to overlook something like vigilance, but it's so dominant when you could just swing out at someone and still have your creatures untapped. The next card is Slaughter the Strong, which is honestly one of my favorite white cards in the entire set, because I think it's going to be good in Standard. I think it's going to be good in Commander as well. It's one of those cards that white has a lot of removal already, so it's easy to overlook a card like this. But each player chooses any number of creatures, total power 4 or less. So if you have a creature with power 4 and you want to keep it, that's the only creature you can keep. The rest you have to sacrifice. So this is meant to punish the player with the most dominant board state, meaning they have the most creatures, highest power toughness. They have to choose which creatures they want to keep. And the good thing about it too is the fact that even the players who are struggling in the game, let's say they had to cast their commander 4 times, and that commander conveniently has power less than 4, then they should be able to stay in the game with their commander, and it's just going to punish whoever has the most developed board state, which is what the card is meant to do. It's called Slaughter the Strong for a reason. The weak should survive. Overall, though, I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult. We do have a lot of good non-creature removal you have to keep in consideration. But if you're looking for a decent card, maybe a little bit more political, I think if you want to make a group hug deck and you need a good board wipe, this isn't going to make everybody at the table angry like a lot of board wipes do. So you have another angle there. The next card was from Ixalan, Settle the Wreckage. Now, I know it might seem a little bit risky giving your opponent's lands in exchange for removing their creatures, but it is exiling removal. They're not getting those creatures back anytime soon. And let's just put it this way. If you could path to exile each of your opponent's attacking creatures at you, wouldn't you do that? I mean, if you're on the ropes and you're desperate enough, wouldn't this card be a godsend? I mean, it's fantastic. You're basically shutting down an opponent's turn. They want to swing all out at you. Go ahead. Take however many basic lands you think you can get, which is another good point. not everybody is going to have enough basic lands equal to the number of creatures that are attacking. There are decks now that are extremely competitive that maybe only play, 10 basic lands? And let's say they already played a few of them. I mean, go ahead, get however many basic lands you want. Yeah, you could easily recast your commander that way your next turn, but still, being able to exile likely the majority of your creatures that are attacking me, because if you want to swing, you might as well go all out. Because again, this isn't standard, this isn't the kind of card that you worry about all the time. But Settle the Wreckage is just one of those cards that I think too many people are just afraid of the consequence of giving your opponents lands, which is understandable, but at the same time, removal is removal. It's exiling removal. Who cares? They get extra lands. I mean, if it's late game anyway, it shouldn't matter that much. Everyone should have enough mana anyway. I don't know, I just like the card. I think it's awesome. Then we have Release to the Wind. Now, incredibly underestimated this card when it was first spoiled. I still don't think it's going to be a good card in Limited or Standard, but its impact in Commander is fantastic when you think about all of the different creatures with cast triggers, specifically cards like Eldrazi, which are just so dominant in the format. You get exiling removal from Ulamog, you get card draw off a Kozilek, you get all that awesomeness off of cast triggers. And even outside of just getting the cast triggers, it's a cool way to basically protect your commander if you want to do that. You can exile any of your non-land permanents. You get to recast that card for however long it remains exiled, so if there's a presence on the board that it's going to be difficult to get around, you can just release to the wind and then just keep that card exiled for a few turns, then play that card when it's safe at the most opportune time, and you should be golden. I mean, it's a fantastic card. Take the best non-land permanent on your board and protect it. You could also use it as quick removal if you need it, because you want to win this turn. It could sort of be that card. So I think it's definitely underrated for now, but give it some time. I think people are going to notice its potential. And then the next card we have is Apocalypse Demon. Now, if you're familiar with cards such as Consuming Aberration and Lord of Extinction, you might like this card. It's not going to get as big because it's not going to have power and toughness equal to multiple different graveyards other than your own, but it still has something that both of those cards do not have, and that is evasion. It has flying, and it's in mono black, so it can fit into multiple different decks that those two can't. So yes, it's not going to be as massive as those two creatures, and there's other ways you could take advantage of their power and toughness. I know you could sacrifice them with something like a Gerard, Golgari Lichlord, or something like that, but with Apocalypse Demon, getting something that could easily be a 20/20 flyer for just 6 mana, that is just ridiculous. And it doesn't even have to be in any graveyard based deck, but rather any deck where you cast a lot of spells, get a lot of stuff in the graveyard, but you don't necessarily care about graveyard synergies. Something like maybe Akalia, where you do get some cards in your graveyard. It's not going to be massive like a 20/20, but it could be a 10/10 flyer easily. Mid to late game, I think that's pretty cool. Massive creatures need to have some sort of evasion in order to be relevant in combat. Otherwise, it's just, hey, why not just chump block? So, a little surprised it hasn't seen as much play, but still pretty good. The next card is Tillinali's Skinshifter. Now, when I first saw this card, I was like, oh my gosh, it can copy any non-legendary creature whenever it attacks. Oh my gosh, it's going to be pretty cool in Commander, a multiplayer format where multiple different creatures, aside from legendaries, are going to be out there, and they're going to be pretty cool. You know, we see a lot of 8-drops. I mean, it shouldn't be difficult to get a copy of a creature that's a non-legendary whenever it attacks, which is a pretty cool thing. It's when it attacks, it doesn't have to have any other condition, and the creature itself has haste. So you're getting a hasty creature out there. It could swing and basically copy something like an It That Betrays that's also on the field. So when you put things into perspective like that, even aside from your own creatures being able to copy them as well, you have a lot of potential. I know red isn't the most popular color in Commander, but it definitely has some of the most underrated cards as a whole. And even more surprising because it's not like one of those other cards from these two sets, Ixalan and Rivals, where you have a ton of tribal-based decks, synergy cards, where it's kind of hard to find a fit for them in other decks aside from tribal decks. So a pretty cool card, but, you know, also underrated. And then we have Tender Shoot Dryad. This one is actually incredibly underrated, and I'm surprised we haven't been hearing about it a lot, but the Ascend keyword is a joke. This one triggers the city's blessing, you get it, on its own, because you get a saproling each upkeep, not just yours, your opponent's as well. So if you're playing a 4-player game, by the time it comes back to you, you have 4 saprolings, okay? Plus the Dryad itself, you should have 5 creatures. It took 5 mana to cast it, so let's say you have at least 5 other permanents. That's the city's blessing right there, and all of your little saprolings get +2/+2. That is just ridiculous. You are getting 3 3s each upkeep from that point on, and they have to deal with it because that is a win con in itself. All you really need is an overrun effect, and you can easily win the game. Doubling Season, Parallel Lives, Anointed Procession, those cards only make this better. And we haven't even talked about the saproling synergies like Tana the Bloodsower, Gave Guru of Spores. There's a ton of them now, and this card is only going to see more and more play. I think it's one of the more promising cards on this list easily, but give it a shot. I think it's pretty cool. Then we have Path of Metal and Mitzali Tower of Triumph. Now, Path of Metal does flip into Mitzali, but when it enters the battlefield, it does 1 damage to each creature that doesn't have First Strike, Double Strike, Vigilance, or Haste, which, you know, in Boros colors, those keywords are pretty easy to come by, and whenever you attack with at least 2 creatures that have those keywords, you can then flip it. So again, if you build your deck correctly, it shouldn't be that difficult. Boros has a lot of good creatures, and keywords are pretty good for combat. Mitzali Tower of Triumph, once you do get it out, it does tap for 1 mana of any color, which is pretty cool about these lands. In the second ability, you can pay 2 mana, tap it, to have it deal 2 damage to each opponent, which it's not bad if you have nothing better to do. And then the last one is you can pay 3 mana and tap it to choose a creature at random that attacked this turn and then destroy that creature. So once you get it flipped, you have a way to punish opponents for attacking with fewer creatures because it has to choose creatures at random. So if they're playing Voltron, hopefully their commander's indestructible, so that should be a pretty cool thing. That should be a pretty cool thing when you also consider it doesn't target, so if they're attacking with something like Ural the Miststalker, hopefully you have some totem armor, enchantments on them. That should be pretty fun though. And then the last card we have is Hadana's Climb, that flips into Winged Temple of Oraska. Now, Hadana's Climb isn't anything super special. It's just going to get a +1/+1 counter on a target creature we control at the beginning of combat. But if that creature has 3 +1/+1 counters on it or more, we can then flip it into Winged Temple of Oraska, which also taps for 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, but has a pretty cool activated ability, which a lot of decks where you would want this are going to benefit, especially in combat. 3 mana and tap it to have target creature you control gain flying, and also +X/+X until end of turn, where X is its power. So auto includes for this would probably be something like Kumena, you know, because there are a lot of Voltron options that you have with that guy, making him unblockable. Why not give him +X/+X in addition to that? That should help it deal more combat damage and eventually deal commander damage. But also you have Izuri Claw of Progress. The whole purpose of that deck is to get creatures pretty big with +1/+1 counters, so it shouldn't be that hard at all to flip Hadana's Climb. Literally the turn you get it out there. But once you do flip it, it should be incredibly easy to get your creatures, pump them up insanely, and win the game just easier. Having a pump on a land is always nice, especially when you're threatening commander damage. But anyway, guys, that's going to do it for these 10 underrated commander cards. Let me know what you think about these. I know a lot of these cards are newer, and they haven't really been exposed to the format long enough compared to sets like Ixalan, Our Devastation. So time will tell whether or not these cards are going to see more play. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Void here signing off. You all have a wonderful day.